As we mentioned, President Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy will meet this Wednesday to talk about the country's debt crisis.
This will be the first time the two have met since the California Republican was elected Speaker. McCarthy says he wants to cut a deal with the president to raise the debt ceiling and prevent the country from defaulting.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen told Axios that a debt default would create a financial crisis and would be devastating for the U.S. Joining us now is CBS News reporter Sarah Ewall-Wice. Sarah, just to lay this out for people, the debt ceiling is the amount of money that Americans can borrow to pay their bills. In this case, we've already incurred the charges. We got to raise the limit in order to pay for them. Kevin McCarthy wants to use this moment to negotiate future cuts in government spending, and the Biden administration is saying, we don't want to negotiate on this point. We've already made these expenses happen. Now we got to pay for them. With that kind of setup and background, I am curious, are Republicans and Democrats sharing the concerns of our Treasury Secretary about catastrophic consequences?
You know, I think both Republicans and Democratic lawmakers have both said there's absolutely no way the United States can default on its debt. It's just not something they're willing to go to. But the reality is we are playing this game of chicken now. And it really isn't clear specifically how much they actually are fully grasping the devastation that this would cause, or whether they're willing to shoulder the responsibility to actually raise the debt limit in time. You mentioned the Treasury Secretary. She's talking about this in terms of devastating and catastrophe. Essentially, she said over the weekend that this would amount to a financial crisis and that the United States, if the U.S. did default on its debt, would go into a recession. This comes while we're already in a time of serious economic uncertainty, and there are forecasts of a recession on the way. So this would guarantee that, according to her. But, you know, the reality is Americans would end up having to pay more for borrowing, as would the United States of America. There would be payments that would not go out, things like Social Security, things like military pay and veterans benefits and health care benefits. So those are just some of the many things that would be problematic. The global markets would go into turmoil, and the U.S. dollar, which is known as the reserve currency, it's supposed to be the safest bet in terms of U.S. securities. Those would all be undermined by this activity, which is why the Treasury Secretary is pressing Congress to act in time.
You know, Sarah, we've been here before. We'll be here again in terms of the game of chicken. But as you stress, these are dire economic times globally, but here in America for sure. Now, Republicans, of course, want budget cuts before agreeing to raise the debt limit. Specifically, where are they looking to slash spending?
You know, that is one of the things that really isn't quite clear at this current moment. You have Speaker McCarthy saying he wants reasonable and responsible efforts here and talking about budget cuts. He did say that he's taking Medicare and Social Security off the table. Oh, those are both part of mandatory spending at this time. But there are other Republicans who say that mandatory spending should be part of the issue that needs to be addressed in terms of spending cuts. Of course, McCarthy also suggesting that what is on the table could be defense spending, speaking specifically about what is considered wasteful spending. So that is on the table, according to him. But there are other Republicans who have called for spending cuts across the board. There are 22 Senate Republicans who sent a letter to President Biden. They are saying that they want spending cuts of the amount that they would raise the debt ceiling or greater, or structural reforms. So that is going to be a hurdle getting both the Senate on board and the House on board for this. Of course, we have this whole thing playing out under a very tight timeline. The Treasury expects it could run out of funding as soon as June to pay its bills.
Sarah, as we sit here and we characterize Kevin McCarthy's comments, I think we should listen to a small part of those comments. This is Kevin McCarthy on Face the Nation talking about a, quote, reasonable way to lift the debt ceiling.
I know the president said he didn't want to have any discussions, but I think it's very important that our whole government is designed to find compromise. I want to find a reasonable and a responsible way that we can lift the debt ceiling but take control of this runaway spending. I mean, if you look at the last 4 years, the Democrats have increased spending by 30%, $400 billion. We're at 120% of GDP. We haven't been in this place to debt since World War II. So we can't continue down this path.
And of course, the reality is the debt was created by presidents and administrations of both parties. Congress is controlled by both as well. I think the question is, if the American pillars of government are compromise, 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 will we see compromise on Wednesday or the opposite?
You know, I think Wednesday's meeting is probably just going to be a jumping off point. It's the start of conversations. They have not met before since we started this new Congress, and Kevin McCarthy was elected Speaker of the House with a Republican majority. But keep in mind, I have spoken to numerous government budget experts, and they have all told me that the reality is that structural reform takes much more time than the deadline that we're currently facing. So there's a conversation about spending, about budgets. They're concerned that it's not going to be something that can be reasonably addressed in the time frame we're currently facing, which could mean kicking the can down the road and continuing this conversation in a couple months.
All right. And Kevin McCarthy did say on 2 occasions on Sunday in the interview with Margaret Brennan that we would not default as a country.
He said that. And in terms of that list of cuts, he seemed to shy away from diving into the conversation about defense spending, even though he might seem open to it elsewhere.
And he took Medicaid and Social Security off the table. So we have some beacons here we can point to. Sarah Ewall-Wice, thank you very much.